Reform and the road to 2020. Billionaire Mark Cuban seems to be setting up a primary challenge to President Trump. During an interview with Fox News host Tucker Carlson last night, Cuban slammed Trump's tax plan and weighed in on how he would help the stagnant middle class.
The first thing I would do, rather than the tax reform we're looking at right now, I decreased payroll taxes significantly so that that money, instead of having every hour taxed as it is now, that money would go right into the hands of the people who need it the most. I would focus on creating technology solutions. I think there's a way that we can reduce the size of government, the size of bureaucracy that deals with health care, but it's going to take somebody who understands technology that can introduce technology to find those solutions.
3. Here we go.
Joining us right now in a First on Fox Business interview is Revolution CEO and Chairman and former CEO of AOL, Steve Case. Steve, great to see you.
Great to be back.
Thanks so much for joining us. So your thoughts on this?
Mark
Cuban, going to run for president.
Well, it seems a little early. I think we have 3 more years to go, but I love the fact that Mark's kind of trying to throw some ideas out there that help the middle class.
Yeah. I mean, so far, there's been such a divisiveness in this country. What do you think about what the policies coming out of this administration have been so far?
Well, I think they're trying to focus on some things like tax reform.
Right.
I hope that gets some traction. I've talked to the president and some of the advisors, Gary Cohn and Wilbur Ross and others, about making sure that as they look at tax reform, and try to focus on simplification, they also create the right investment incentives so entrepreneurs, particularly in the middle of the country, we call the rise the rest, have access to capital so they can start companies and create jobs there. We have this growing divide in the country where a lot of innovation and wealth creation and job creation is happening on the coast. There are a lot of people in the middle of the country that do feel left out and left behind. So hopefully that will be one of the areas that, as tax reform moves forward, that it will be a more inclusive innovation economy. Last year, 75% of venture capital went to just 3 states.
Wow.
And so we need to make sure everybody everywhere really has a shot at the American dream.
Where do you see growth? I mean, you were really one of the first people to get on this sort of longevity bandwagon, wellness longevity with your Revolution company. Tell me where you see growth in the world today.
Well, I think the big opportunity is what I've called the third wave of the internet. The first wave is getting everybody connected. We started AOL over 3 decades ago. Only 3% of people are online, so building on-ramps was the first wave. The last 15 or 20 years is really the second wave, building apps and services on top of the internet, Facebook and Google and so forth. But the third wave is just now happening. It's really integrating the internet in seamless ways throughout healthcare and energy, food, agriculture, transportation, smart cities. A lot of things are up for grabs in the third wave, but I think it's going to require a different mindset for entrepreneurs. Partnerships with other companies are going to be more important. Policy, regulatory issues are going to become more important. And I also believe it'll tie in with the rise of the rest, because the expertise in a lot of those sectors like healthcare and farming is in the middle of the country. So if we back the entrepreneurs who are close to those, those industries, that's where the third wave really will break out. It won't just be, I think we're kind of at peak Silicon Valley here, and we're in Saudi. People talk about peak oil. I think we're at kind of peak Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley will continue to be strong and vibrant, but we're going to see a more inclusive innovation economy, and entrepreneurs will regionalize within the United States and globalize really all around the world.
Yeah, you make a good point, because when you were first, obviously, with AOL, it was a different moment in time in terms of the internet. We were on the doorstep of a new revolution, if you will, but today it's about adding on to that. It's about really different stools, different legs to the stool.
And integrating it. So to take something like smart cities. I was in Columbus a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. We did another Rise the Rest tour to Ohio and Indiana and Michigan, states like that. Columbus won the Smart Cities Challenge. They've got $50 million from the government to match that with $500 million, and they're trying to create a model of smart cities, which is exciting. But it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the software. How do you partner with other companies? GE and IBM, some of the biggest companies in the world, are partnering with the startups to create smart cities. And how do you deal with some of the policy issues? There's some tough privacy, big brother issues. There's risk around cyber terrorism, bringing down some of these smart cities. So the third wave innovation is not going to just be about coding and writing software and apps. It's going to be really dealing with some of the most fundamental aspects of our lives, how we stay healthy, how we move around cities, and doing that in partnership with other companies and understanding the growing importance of policy, and therefore you have to interact and engage with governments, which entrepreneurs generally are resistant of doing.
Is this part of the discussion on your panel today? You're here, you're going to be doing a panel, The World in 2030, Creating Value for the Next Generation, with Richard Branson and David Bonderman.
Yeah, it's really talking about what's happening in the next 10 or 20 years. So I'll talk a lot about the third wave and why it's going to require a different kind of approach to entrepreneurship. We'll talk about the rise of the rest and how we're trying to encourage more entrepreneurship in more parts of the country, more parts of the world. We'll also talk about impact investing. We're hearing that theme at this conference, and having business not just focused on profit, but also focused on purpose, so having a broader impact. That's resonating with a lot of particularly young people who want to work for companies that stand for more than short-term profit, do business with those companies, as well as invest in those companies. So the third wave of innovation will be a big theme, the rise of the rest, and more regional entrepreneurship and impact investment.
I think it's really interesting that so many large technology companies have investment arms, and they're acquiring some of these startups. You know, those companies that don't want to go public because they don't want to deal with the regulatory environment. You've got the arm of Google, an investment arm at Amazon, buying up some of these companies.
Which is actually great. It's a good way for them to drive forward and innovate. Some of the most interesting businesses now that somebody like Google has, Android or things like that, came through acquisition. And a great example is what I saw 2 weeks ago in Indianapolis. Salesforce acquired a company there called ExactTarget for nearly $3 billion. They've now doubled the size of that company. It's now 2,000 employees in downtown Indianapolis. And the founder, Scott Dorsey, has gone on to start a venture fund and invest in the next generation of companies in Indianapolis. So look, everybody thinks of Salesforce as a Silicon Valley company, and it is. Their second largest site outside of California is now Indianapolis, and that's just a perfect example of this idea of the rise of the rest. There's more cities that are rising, the brain drain where people leaving those cities is slowing. There's a boomerang of talent. We just need to follow it with that venture capital. Anything we can do to get more capital in the hands of more entrepreneurs doing more interesting things in this third wave will result in a much more inclusive innovation economy. We'll have a country where everybody feels optimistic about the future, not fearful.
This is really fascinating. You're absolutely right. Steve, I'll be watching that panel. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you today. Steve Case joining us there.